In this video, I'll explain the process that a soldier has to go through when they want to leave the United States Army. What's up, friends? In this video, I'm explaining the process that a soldier has to go through when they're exiting the Army. Now, mainly be talking about ETSing, which stands for Expiration Term of Service. That is what I did. After I did 10 years in the Army, I decided I was ready for, a change in lifestyle and get out of the Army, and I had to go through this process. I'm not going to be covering the process when you retire or if you are medically being separated from the Army. There are some extra steps that are involved with that. Some of these steps do kind of carry over into that process, but then those ones usually have a few extra things that they throw in there that I am not covering in this video. I'm mainly talking about a soldier that maybe, enlists for 4 years, decides to get out, maybe more than 4 years, but not quite at the point where they're retiring from the Army, and how that process works for that individual when they are exiting the Army. Also important to note is the process I'm explaining mainly applies to active duty military and may be very similar for those in the reserves or National Guard, but I don't really know because I didn't serve in that and I didn't really look into it that deeply. So just kind of be aware there may be a little bit of differences here and there based on if someone was in the reserves or National Guard, as my focus is mainly on active duty personnel. So when a soldier starts that process to exit the Army, there are two key things that they will have to do, one of them being ACAPing and the second one clearing the Army. When that process starts just depends on that soldier's ETS date or when they would like to terminal leave, which I'll explain those a little bit more in depth here in a minute. Now let's start off with that first process, which is ACAP. And ACAP stands for Army Career and Alumni Program. So the process of ACAPing is required for any individual in the United States Army on active duty who has served more than 180 days on active duty. Now, a soldier could start this process 18 months out, but in a lot of cases, you don't get that luxury of getting to start that far out. If you do, you're very fortunate. Most people get stuck having to do this within, 2-3 months out, 1 month out, maybe 6 months out. It just kind of varies based on different situations that individuals kind of have with their units and what's going on at that time frame. Anything usually around like a month, 2 months is usually kind of pushing it to where it makes it difficult and very challenging to have to do the process, because there's a lot of things that are involved with this ACAP process that I'm going to break down a little bit of which, but some of them will vary based on post to post, and sometimes they add stuff, so it kind of constantly changes a lot of times, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a breakdown of how that process kind of works. So what happens during ACAP? So you're gonna go through a lot of classes. A soldier has a lot of classes to go through. A lot of them are great classes. Some of them are just briefings where they're just explaining different, benefits that are available to them, explaining how the GI Bill works, explaining how, some VA benefits work, different things like that, as well as classes that are very helpful to a soldier, like taking classes on how to build a resume. That class I remember taking where you're doing basically, I think it was a whole day's worth or maybe half a day's worth of someone talking to you and teaching you how to build a good resume and giving you a lot of like booklets and paperwork and everything like that to help you build your own resume successfully to get the job that maybe you're looking to get after you get out of the Army. And then there are a lot of other classes that are kind of along those same lines, helping a soldier transition from that military lifestyle to the civilian lifestyle, especially for those individuals that maybe that's all they know. They went straight out of high school, right into the Army, and the last however many years, that's all they've known is that military kind of standard, that military lifestyle. And now they have to kind of adapt to what it's like in the civilian world. So a lot of those classes are geared for that, to help them transition from military life to civilian life. Also, another key thing that happens during ACAPing is you'll go through a bunch of physicals. A soldier will go through physicals to see, how they've changed over the years. They kind of compare it to their initial physical when they first joined the military to see, what injuries they may have received, in their military career, what things may have gotten worse over their military career compared to things that have, done in the military and other physicals they've done while in the military. This also helps to also annotate like service-connected injuries, so that way when they go to apply for VA compensation, they have to get a copy of the medical records from the local hospital on base and stuff, and then give those copies over to the VA representative so that way they can evaluate it and determine what service-connected disabilities they may have and give them a rating for that, or even see what other kind of benefits may be offered for that veteran. So this is a process that can take kind of a while. You're kind of, making appointments to attend these briefings, to attend these classes, to do these physicals, and that can be spread out over time. Like I said, you can do it 18 months out. Some people don't get that luxury and they have to, just kind of really pile up those appointments and try to get them knocked out in a short time period if they can. But once they have completed ACAPing, they're able to move on to the next step, which is to clear the Army. Typically, this process starts anywhere from maybe 2 to 4 weeks from when they're supposed to be either starting that terminal leave that I'll talk about later, or from their ETS date of when they're supposed to be out of the Army. Once they're within that time frame, they usually attend some kind of briefing that kind of talks about clearing, and from that briefing they're able to receive those clearing papers as well as make what's called a final out appointment, which is basically the day that they're supposed to be done with everything, finaling out and accomplishing the goal that they're looking for of transitioning out of the Army. So these clearing papers essentially is a checklist. It's basically got different locations and different tasks that that soldier has to complete before that final out date to clear the Army, to get out of the Army. And there's a lot of stuff on that list. I'm not going to talk about everything that's really on that list. It's going to also vary based on different installations as well, but some of them are really boring. Like, for example, one of them is going to be the library, where you have to make sure you don't have any overdue books checked out or anything like that from the post library. So I'm only going to talk about really just maybe a couple of key ones that usually are very important to that soldier. First one I'm going to talk about that you have to clear when you're going through this process is probably the one that's most difficult for most individuals, the biggest pain, whatever you want to kind of think of it as, but that is clearing CIF, which stands for Central Issuing Facility, which is where you get all of your Army gear, your helmet, your vest, your sleeping bag, all that stuff comes from this location. And is what you're basically gonna have to do is you have to clean all that stuff, inventory, make sure you have, all the items that are on this probably huge list of items that you have been, receiving while you're in the Army or while you're at that duty station that are due back. And all those items have to be like squeaky clean. Sometimes, in some cases, I feel like they have to be cleaner than you actually received them. Now, usually you have to make an appointment. Some installations may allow soldiers just to simply walk in and try to turn in their items, but usually the ones I've dealt with, you had to make some kind of appointment for when you were ready to clear, for when you're ready to try to turn in all of this equipment. So soldiers probably spend several days trying to inventory this equipment, trying to clean this equipment, but there's also an asset that is available to them if they have enough time, which is Quartermaster. Quartermaster will clean these items, some of the items anyways, for you, and sometimes they'll give you a little slip that is kind of like a, hey, this stuff's been cleaned by Quartermaster, so it's good to go, and CIF will usually be, okay, yeah, this stuff's good, so we'll just go ahead and accept this stuff in some cases. Some cases they may still inspect it, and if it's not clean enough to their standards, you may get it kicked back as well. So that's a great, asset that some soldiers might utilize, is using Quartermaster to get certain items that they'll accept to get cleaned by them, and then they'll clean the rest themselves. So then once their appointment date comes up, they take all of that equipment, probably like in a shopping cart or something, and they go through different stations. They have one area where they turn in certain items, another area where they turn in different items. They get inspected, they get checked off of a checklist, and if there's something that's dirty, it gets kicked back and you're gonna have to try again at a later date, maybe the next day, maybe later that day, just depending on how that CIF kind of works for, attempting, to re-clean stuff and try to return in other items. But then after all that's said and done, you've probably gotten, some things kicked back that you have to re-clean, and you bring them back and try to turn them in again, and hopefully they accept them that second time or whatever. And then once everything you have has been turned in, then they go through the list. If there's still some items that you're missing, then you may have to pay for those items or go re-buy those items and turn in maybe some brand new versions of those items. But you will have to be completely cleared of that list. Whatever items you received when you initially got to that installation, you're gonna have to turn those in. Whether you pay for those items or you get brand new ones, whatever the case might be, they have to be cleared and basically everything checked off of that list from what you've been issued. Now, another big one is going to be the ID card. So it works a couple different ways. If you're ETSing out of the Army, but you've maybe only done 4 years, well, you still have that 8-year commitment for the IRR, for the inactive reserve component, and they may give you a new ID card that takes you out to that date for making that requirement of 8 years. So you may get a new ID card that has that date. But if you've done more than 8 years and there's still time left on the ID card, they'll maybe just have you keep it and just check you off on the list, and they'll tell you that when it expires, you got to turn it in. A lot of people don't, though, however. In my case, I did more than 8 years, and I still had a few months left on my ID card before it was going to expire, so they simply just told me to hang on to that ID card since I still had several months left on it, and then when it was expired, I was supposed to mail it back, but there's really nobody to check on that. I still have it, just kind of with all my other Army stuff. Now, once you've gone through this entire clearing list, you've had everybody stamp off or sign off whatever they're supposed to do on that clearing paperwork. Hopefully you've done this before your final out date. You then can move to your final out appointment. Now, one good thing is if you're, pretty well organized with it, and maybe you can get a lot of this stuff done early and then be done early, and you don't have to go back to your unit or anything like that. You can just tell them you're busy clearing because that's your dedicated thing. You maybe show up in the morning for formation, and because you're clearing, you show up in uniform. You don't have to do physical fitness in most cases, and you're busy clearing. But they don't know what the status usually is of that clearing paperwork. So if you've pretty much finished a few days early, then you kind of have a little bit of time to kind of goof off and kind of maybe do extra things or just chill out for a little bit. So it's a really good idea to try to knock out all of that stuff early. That way maybe you have a little bit of time to, fix things if they kind of are not working out the way you planned, especially like CIF stuff, or maybe even just some extra time to kind of chill out and take it easy before your final out appointment. But if you don't manage time properly or things just didn't go your way, you get to your final out date and you're still not done clearing, then you're gonna have to make a new final out appointment to extend that out. But let's talk about once you get to that final out appointment, let's say everything's done. Now this is the point where you're able to get that magical DD-214 form. So you go through some additional things. They're going to verify that everything has been cleared off of this clearing checklist that you have received, as well as go through the system and do some different things to produce your DD-214. Now, if you have served more than 8 years, like I did, then you're going to immediately get your DD-214 along with your honorable discharge certificate. But if you did not serve the full 8 years yet, and maybe you've only done 4 or 5 years or whatever, you may only receive that DD-214, and at a later date, after you've completed the full 8-year obligation, receive in the mail your little fancy certificate that has your honorable discharge on it. So after your final out date, you possibly have some leave dates that you want to utilize. This is where you get a chance to either take terminal leave or simply cash in some of those leave days, kind of depending on your situation. If your final out date is basically the same date as your ETS date, then you probably don't have any room for taking any of those leave days and you have to cash all of them out. Or if you didn't have any vacation maybe to start with, you couldn't take anything, so you had to make your final out date, basically your ETS date, then you might not have that kind of options available to you. But in a lot of cases, soldiers save up some of their vacation time so that way they have some time at the end to be able to take terminal leave, which is basically using whatever leave you have to kind of, still receive an Army paycheck for that time. You're basically on vacation, you're technically still in the Army, but you're not having to do anything with the Army anymore. So now you can use that time to try to find a new job, to get stuff done, and still kind of receive your Army paycheck for that remaining time that you have left on terminal leave for those leave days that you saved up. Now there is a max. I believe the max is actually 60 days. You cannot take more than 60 days of the terminal leave or cash in more than 60 days. So if you saved up a bunch of leave days, that's kind of going to be the max. So you may have to split some of that up. I think there's actually a time frame. So if you have more than 60 days, I think you start losing it after the fiscal year anyway. So there's probably not a lot of kind of situations that allow you to have even more than 60 days, even saved up anyways. So you have those different options of either, using up all 60 days if you had that much time to your ETS date, but if you don't have enough, time between your ETS date and your final out date to take 60 days, then some of that may have to get cashed out. But soldiers are going to kind of have it all kind of line up. So if you only had maybe 10, 20 days to be able to take of terminal leave, then you have it kind of timed to where your final out date basically lines up so that your remaining 20 days or how many days you have left saved up takes you to that ETS date. So there you go. That's basically the process that a soldier has to go through with, trying to get out of the Army. There is a lot more that kind of factors in there, but I'm not going to talk about every specific thing, but hopefully that gives you kind of a little bit of a general understanding as to what to expect when you get to that point, or if you're just curious of it, it kind of gives you a general understanding of what that process, what that soldier has to go through before they actually exit the Army. For some people, this process can be quite challenging. In my example, I didn't get that much time to go through ACAPing and clearing. I basically got, I think, maybe almost 2 months, maybe a little bit less. And it was also around like Christmas time frame. So that Christmas time frame of the end of December really kind of limited my ability to do certain items and certain tasks during ACAPing. And then also because I was a non-commissioned officer, I was required to turn in a final NCOER, which is just an official document kind of evaluating you as a non-commissioned officer. And my unit was a little bit late on completing that, so I ended up having to extend my final out date past a couple of extra days and had to cash in some of my leave days. So if you have any more questions about kind of the process of getting out of the Army, what it's like for soldiers, leave those questions down in the comment section down below. For any of my veterans out there that have already done this process, I would love to, maybe hear from you guys, maybe some of the stories. How well did it work out for you? What kind of nightmares did you encounter? All that kind of stuff. If you want to share those details down in the comments down below, please feel free to do so. I do actually have some videos that kind of document my experience with this whole process of getting out of the Army in a little series called Soldier to Civilian. And I have a kind of a revisited version that I kind of remastered all the footage and kind of chopped it up a little bit. I'll leave a link down below to the playlist, as well as probably a card up here somewhere, as maybe if you want to check that out, you can see kind of how it was for me going through that process. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that thumbs up. I got a couple more videos right over there if you want to check those out as well. And down in the description, there's some links to social media, Patreon, and more. Thanks so much for watching. I'm ThatChrisChaos. I'll see you next time. See ya.